So Justin
Welcome
did,
back, everybody.
yeah. So Justin did say that he had a conflict and he won't be able to join. And he did, where's my meeting notes here? He did post a link to the blog that he posted. Where is it? Let me just put this here in the meeting. So for those that are new to the group, there might be some good information. For those, this is basically a quick overview to kind of, this is almost our first public info out on what the goals are for Notary V2. So we're already getting into it, realize we don't even have a thing to point people to other than a pending PR with a lot of discussions. So that's really helpful to get out there. Let me just put this in the notes. So there's some, I see a couple of new folks. Let's see, Ian. Do you guys want to just introduce yourself and kind of give an outline of what you're interested in? Oh, I see. I can see the notes. Ian's from Scilab, so welcome.
Hello.
So thanks I'm glad to see the Scilabs folks joining. I know you guys have gotten a lot of work done there. Why don't I just jump into the agenda, then we can, based on time, we can figure out if anybody else wants to break up anything else. So just on the notes, one, I'll work to make sure that we get stuff out at least on the Friday before. We've been trying to do that with the OCI calls so people know whether to come or whether they can come and so forth. I've been working with Amy on getting a spot for us to talk at KubeCon for those that are attending. I wouldn't necessarily suggest we have a robust agenda just yet that I could suggest that somebody should come in just for that meeting, but the goal is while we're there, we found the face-to-face meetings could be very highly productive, so we want to do that. We're more than likely shooting for midweek. Amy felt that the Monday was going to be pretty challenging, and the end of the week, some people liked it because they'd have a lot of content. Others felt they'd be fried. So we're more than likely going to go for a midweek, like a 2 to 3 hours slot, so that we can cover a number of different topics. And depending on how much time and topics that we want to discuss, we'll obviously let people know so they can make the appropriate agenda schedules, because obviously having it midweek means it'll be overlapping with some other sessions, so there's no perfect time. So that's the update there. She's working very hard with the scheduling folks, and we do recognize that people would like to book their travel, so we're doing what we can to get that done. We did,
question, Steve?
Yeah, shoot, Omar.
Steve, midweek, week of KubeCon would be what, the 1st? Like Wednesday?
Probably, I mean, midweek could be either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, meaning it's not at the beginning of it on the pre-con day Monday, and we wouldn't necessarily plan it for Friday.
Understood.
So where in that, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm leaving it up to Amy to figure out, one, A, where logistically can she find a room, and B, if there is any something about the agenda that might be a spot for us to do it.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the KubeCon schedule stuff. From a repo, we did get a little bit of housekeeping done, just getting the DCO stuff in place and getting the license in place. That's the existing work, just some of the overhead and housekeeping. We have been having a lively discussion on the scenarios, the scenarios under the requirements repo. I was just reviewing them again today. There's, let's see, just looking who's on the call. If Sam's here. Yeah, great. So I'd actually like to spend as much time on that. Because I'm struggling with a little bit of the balance between naming specific things that don't yet support the scenarios we're trying to do, but still having some concrete descriptions, and then also not trying to get specifically into usability, because we wanted to make that separate as well. So there's a bunch of good meaty conversations in there. before we jump into that, is there anything anybody else wants to bring up? Because I imagine that that will probably take the majority of the time.
This is Lahir from AWS. I added a comment on the requirement of signing locally. It's mentioned at a couple places in the doc. I just want to discuss whether that's not something that we want to define at this point, whether the signature is created locally or not.
Fair. Yeah, that is one of and there's a couple implications of how Docker IO is assumed in some cases. So that's definitely one of the topics that we were going to discuss in that.
Right.
I'll give the proverbial 15 seconds or so of pause if anybody's got anything.
No, I think we were chatting earlier. It'd be nice to get a sense of where we are on the breakouts, like who all have to do what and what all the help.
Oh, that's a good point. You want to just drive that for a moment?
Yeah, I'll put that on the agenda item, and then we want to do the repo update as the last. Is that what you're thinking?
Let's just do that, just because I imagine that'll take up whatever time we have left, and I hopefully you're basically reminding us of what the status is on things and who's taking care of what. And
yeah, and actually I'm kind of reminding myself. So I am looking very hard for the original HackMD notes from the
it should
meeting.
be in this one. I actually used this one. So if you just scroll down this doc, I realized I was starting to get separate ones, and that seems silly. So I just put everything in one.
Okay. So we ended up thinking about 5 breakouts. Is that correct? Where are we? Breakout conversations. We said that there would be the threat model along with key management, and that Justin Cormack thought that he would take a stab at.
Mm-hmm.
There was efforts around how this would integrate well with OCI and what that would do for the spec, and I think Vincent had that one. It's probably too premature to start thinking about that at this moment, is it, Vincent? We want to get more fully fleshed out on scenarios and use cases before we go there.
My apologies. I'm distracted in 2 different conversations. Can you restate your question?
When we met over in Seattle, we split things out into breakouts, right? And one of the breakouts we picked was we thought was the OCI impact, like how will this work with the OCI and the spec and all of that thing. And I believe you signed up to be the DRI on that one. Probably too soon to start thinking about that at this moment, right? That
can wait. Yeah, no, I did sign up for that because it was mostly on the distribution side. And I mean, John Johnson and I did a few strawmans of what kind of additive APIs would be there. There's not been anything particularly. Nothing has happened since that conversation. I think except for a few not quite back channels, just can the distribution spec go 1.0 without waiting on that conversation any further has really been the only thing that's happened since then. I think a lot of people are wanting to see the distribution spec go 1.0.
Yeah.
Later, so.
Okay. So, like I thought, nothing. And Steve, you've already made progress on the scenarios, right? The original. That's the rest of the work. And I took the ownership on the UX, like what the CLI and the API and the params will need, but I'm going to wait on seeing how the scenarios flow out, because that's really from where some of the use cases will drive, and that determines our experience. Key management, I think we'll need Justin here to speak to that. And we can follow up with him next week. Am I missing anything? We had 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3, 4. Was threat model and key management separate, or was that? So I've got threat model and key management, integration with OCI, the spec, scenarios, use cases, which is 4.
Right, which is 4. Okay, so then it's just 4. Because okay, I think we did say threat and key management go. Oh, sorry.
Let me split those out, because those really are pretty big, gnarly things on their own. It's just that Justin signed up for both of them. And I know he's been thinking about the threat model. And I think the key management discussions have been as much of the conversations around registry storage without the sidecar. But there's a lot of things around the key management, I would imagine, from the lifecycle management to where the keys get stored to the root key conversations. So we'll probably why don't we just save that whole conversation when he can join us?
Let's do that. And internally inside AWS, we spoke to our key crypto/signing organization. And they expressed an interest to lend a hand and help in on the key management piece as needed, so we can help Justin so that he's not caught too hair. And I'll bring that up with him next week as well.
Great.
We can have both a product help as well as an engineering lead, as it were, to partner.
Excellent. Okay. And I think I know, the other one was usability. We say use cases, but didn't we have a usability topic?
We did have UX.
And I think you were signing up for driving.
Correct. Yes, it was UX.
Okay. So I think at least for me, I know I've been deferring UX from the scenarios so that hopefully as those start to evolve, we can point to some of that stuff in place. So we'll just defer that there. Okay, so anything else?
Nope.
All right, so let's get into this scenarios one. I'm just looking here. I think I saw Sam here, right? Yeah. Sam, can you talk? I'm not sure what room you're in.
Yeah, I was just muted.
Okay, great.
I'm here.
So, all right, let me get to make sure I'm keeping notes here. So for the local signing, why don't we start there? Because I know that's been a couple of conversations there. And the thought process around the local signing was more a matter of if we can sign something locally and not have it persisted in a registry, but yet we can still have it moved to a registry, then we kind of have the autonomy that we need to be able to do that. It doesn't preclude the signature being put in a central location, which it might be in, or the key rather, the key being in a registry. It's just a matter of where the signature is at that point in time. So the simplified thought process is a key is in a central place, wherever that might be, and there has to be access to where that key is. And then the signature is applied to that artifact, whether it be an image, a Helm chart, or whatever. And the signature is persisted locally in some form, again, not getting into the detail. And then when it gets pushed to a registry, the signature just goes to that registry, and the signature has to point to the key. If the key is in the same registry that it was pushed to, great. If the key is in a different location, that's where it is. If somebody is in an air-gapped environment where they need the key to be with the registry, then that key has to move, or copied, I don't want to say moved, is copied to that secure environment, and there's a trust that's established that the thing that is now holding the key is assumed to be trusted as a proxy for where the key was originally. And then, of course, before I pause, there's all of the implications of revocation synchronization that has to happen associated with that as well. So that was the very high level simplification thought process.
I think locally signing makes a lot of sense, and portability of the signature makes a lot of sense. I don't think that I don't expect that anyone's going to disagree with that. I think that there are some questions in the scenario that you wrote out specifically about naming and separating the name from something having to do with the registry, and I think that we can suss that out a little bit. The other thing that you mentioned about key distribution, I think that deserves its own conversation that's a little bit separate from just whether we're going to sign things locally and naming.
I'm not doing a good job of typing and listening at the same time, so I'm going to defer to the recording because. So, I'm sorry, Sam. Can you say that again because it didn't sync?
So I think locally signing and signature portability is an important aspect of what we want to design here. And I think that I expect that there's broad agreement for that. I wouldn't expect that to be controversial. If someone does disagree, please correct me on that. In the scenarios that you wrote on the GitHub pull request, there's a little bit of confusion between just what does a local signature mean versus the name of an image. And I think we need to clarify that a little bit more, that the name doesn't necessarily mean that it's tied to a particular registry.
Right.
I think that's what you were talking about with the bare name versus the Docker IO thing. I think we need to make that a little bit clear so that we're not implying that even though there might be a registry in the name or there might not be a registry in the name, that doesn't really imply anything about where the signature is at a given point in time. The other thing that you were talking about
actually, can we pause on
key
that
distribution.
one?
Yeah.
Was my, so Omar also was picking up on that, and we were discussing having a definition of terms, because there was definitely a piece there that because I'm working on this in hour chunks, I'm not really having the right clarity I need. I need a couple of hours to focus on this. But what we saw, what I'm seeing is, just as you pointed out, there's three elements, right? There's the key, there's the signature. Wait, am I thinking that's right? The key, then there's the signature, there's the artifact itself, regardless of what it's named, and then where it's stored. So there's actually four things. And if we can articulate those clearly, then as the signatures move and as they reference keys and where they're stored, I think this makes a little bit more sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, there are five if you want to count them. The fifth one is what the user wants to pull. Last time we had the conversation about versioning or about signatures and forcing that the user gets the right version of the product. And that's not the same as the location of the image.
As the location? Is that what the last part was?
Yeah. I think you said key, signature.
Key, signature, artifact, storage. Where's the four elements?
So the fifth is the user intent. So that the user wants to get an artifact that does something specific, or?
Yeah, so the idea is I have a key, I could sign something, I can sign an artifact with a signature, and then I can store it. Where I store it is part of the OCI registry. Is I think the biggest question, and this is where I think Sam was going to next, is that whole coordination of the key store, its trust, its air gappedness for copies. That is, of course, the gnarly one that starts to come in. But am I teasing?
I think it's important to separate the concept of the physical location and of the user intent, because we basically ended up with Notary with exactly the same thing, that the two are the same. That trust pinning is connected to the physical location, that the signatures contain the physical location, and they don't have to be.
I got most of that. So I think you're trying to refer to how do we not wind up back where we wound up with Notary v1 because of
if there is a public internet image MySQL :3 and I mirror it locally to my mirror.example / MySQL :3, the signature that comes from the original vendor is going to say this came from a Docker Hub or something. It's not going to say it came from the local mirror.
Okay, so there's two parts in there, and whoever's typing, if we can capture that, there was another deeper discussion around signatures and versions and how we handle that. There was
issue number 2 filed in GitHub.
I'm sorry, Merrick, can you say that again?
I think it's the issue number 2 on GitHub. I've just
Oh, did I put something
yeah,
there?
how you think. I'm afraid I didn't wasn't able to completely participate in the PR yet.
Okay, so let's come back to that one because I think we'll definitely get back to the whole versioning portion of it. But if a signature is for MySQL, and we know that it's from the company or whatever we determine is MySQL, the entity, then there's another part is the signature, sorry, is the key in the same location as the registry? Is that what you're touching on?
The another part is that you somehow have to infer the user intent to use MySQL and to use the MySQL key. That's not something that's automatic, especially in the disconnected environments when things move around. And we are assuming untrusted registries. If we are not assuming untrusted registries that are going to switch image under us, then we don't mostly need signatures.
This was getting into the kind of the chicken and egg of discoverability of the signature and not attaching the name as a part of it, such that if you know that you could only have a valid signature if you fetched it from where the publisher originally published it, so that the signature could move, you know, independently of. Which I think we all agreed that like the name wouldn't be bound into it, so that if you mirrored, you know, the MySQL image locally, and it's exactly the same image, that the signature should still validate that thing, even if you pulled it from localhost 5000/MySQL.
Is it realistic to, like, you guys obviously dealt with keys much deeper than I have, so I'm just going to ask a naive question. Is the discussion I hear happening in this space is, if I'm in a air-gapped environment, we'll use that as the extreme, then somebody has established that air-gap environment. Somebody has established that registry. And the theory in my head, at least with this, is that the person that established that has established a trust. So for instance, the MySQL signature, sorry, the MySQL key is moved to that registry, and that environment has been redirected at it as being the new authority. And the developer that's pushing things in and out, they really have no say in this case, right? There's somebody else has made that policy decision, and it's assumed, and I'm using the word assume here, to be trusted, because somebody's set up in that environment. Is that kind of what we're discussing, and is that realistic?
No, I mean, if you say that whoever decides to mirror MySQL into examples.com/abc is right by definition, and whatever the users wanted to pull, then that's kind of the same as saying that signatures don't apply to disconnected, because that person can just switch the images around in some unexpected ways. And it could be fine to say that we are just not considering this. Or if you are saying that the person making the mirroring is going to make an explicit choice and say, trust the MySQL key for a repo ABC, and that's the configuration of those systems in that data center, sure, that makes perfect sense. That expresses the user intent I was talking about. It doesn't have to be the ultimate consumer of the image. It can be a system administrator of the data center, but it has to be the actual person of the authority, so that we have end-to-end verification.
Can you clarify a little bit more what you mean by someone switching around the images? Because in my expectation here is that the signature is going to form a cryptographic verification that the particular image that's being vended was signed by a given key.
Yeah.
And so it's not like you can change the content without affecting the key or affecting the signature.
Right. So this is all getting back to two different things that I'll try and do my best to loop back the conversations we've already had. In the approach where the signature Notary V1 way that the signature is produced when you push it to a particular registry and it is signed at that time. You could recreate that in an air-gapped way, but then all the machines that are pulling it are trusting this new locally air-gapped key that repushed any other media and that one key alone, because it's the new signer of this key in an air-gapped environment. But that is not the use case that many people need in this air-gapped environment. Say, for instance, you want to fetch an image that actually has the roots of trust from some ISV, as well as later like the use case of like the production key or whatever else. That if you Docker save or whatever, some way Scopio copy from a mirror to mirror it for an an air-gapped place, that you could also air-gap the original signature for that image that is signed by whatever ISV that you have the root, that you have the public key of that you trust, and know that somebody hasn't meddled with it and just repushed something with a, single confined air-gap key that is the meddling with or potentially pushing a different image. So this is why, like, decoupling the name from the registry, as well as, or the identity, as well as being able to have multiple signatures on an image that could be transported as well.
Yeah, and switching.
This is why we've talked about signing the digest.
Switching images in this scenario means if I have the key from the vendor and the vendor has signed version 1 and version 2 of the image, both have valid signatures of the artifact, then an attacker on the path from the vendor to the consumer of the image should not be able to substitute the correctly signed version 1 image for the version 2 image, causing the user to run an old insecure version.
Okay, so you're mostly concerned about swapping out old versions for new versions, not swapping out some completely different piece of a completely different artifact for something that was requested.
Swapping correctly signed artifacts, yes.
Samuel, okay. I think it's both, but yeah.
I mean, modifying the artifact is of course in scope, but I'm also concerned about swapping correctly signed artifacts.
Yeah, because if you're in an environment where you're controlling who signs the key and what roots of trust are on the machines that are going to be pulling the key in some air-gapped, use case, then you could make it all up. But we do have the use case where you use the actual vendor-provided roots of trust key, not just some local made-up authority.
Yeah, this is actually more of a concern of public internet with Docker Hub and other public registries, which are free for all and completely untrusted. The risk of them meddling or being manipulated to meddle with the path between the consumer and producer of the image is fairly real. In the disconnected environment, we can kind of say that the administrator of the disconnected link is trusted and has some authority, but switching signed images on the public registries is a real risk.
So is part of this that if I have, we'll just use the MySQL example. So I have MySQL, obviously the key is not in my air-gapped environment to start with. MySQL owns that. I mirror that key into my registry, into my air-gapped environment so I can locally validate it. If the key is if the key is mirrored, is it fair to say you can't sign new content somehow with that mirrored key? But I could always validate existing content. If that was possible, would that solve is that even the concern that we're trying to solve?
I don't think so, quite.
I wouldn't expect that. So
not going to give you the key to sign anything that's not going to be possible.
We would expect the public portion of the key to be distributed, not the private portion. And you shouldn't be able to create a signature with the public portion of the key.
Correct.
Fair. Okay. Right. Duh. Okay, so then I'm missing, I guess I'm missing some of the concern here. I'm trying to figure out what the flow is that works and doesn't work.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, Stuart.
Okay, cool. So I think there was an idea that the name should mean nothing, right? So you've got MySQL, and it doesn't matter what you call it; it's still MySQL, and there needs to be a way, maybe MySQL v whatever. There needs to be a way of verifying that. And there was an idea that we should also, as well as kind of, you could have annotations which would be therefore in the manifest, that when the signature was created, you would be effectively signing the annotations as well to say that this is actually MySQL version whatever, and that then you could check. Then that would be something that you could verify at the consumer end to say that the image is the thing that you're looking for, no matter what the name or the repository or where it has ended up.
So this might be a good point of, while we want this, the thought process here is, while we want the entities to be able to be signed external to a registry, there's nothing that says we wouldn't tie it to concepts that are in an OCI registry. So the thought that I'm trying to tease into the specs, and obviously it's not coming in clarity yet, is tags are immutable. Tags can be changed, but manifests are immutable. So if the idea that we were going with was the thing you're signing, you're signing this artifact. The thing that makes that artifact unique is the manifest. So even though it's not associated with the registry yet, it still has a manifest. We sign the manifest, the signature is associated with it in whatever persistence, when I'm not at that point yet. So now it doesn't matter what you name it, because whatever that tag and name is, as long as it's whatever manifest is pointing to, that's the thing that's signed. So I could rename it. It doesn't really matter, as whatever that thing is, the signature is associated with the manifest and it can flow. And the manifest itself even isn't tied to a registry. It's just tied to a definition of a thing. Does that help?
I think the point that Stuart was trying to say is that the manifest can contain annotations, and as long as the annotations are in there and you're signing the manifest, you're also signing the annotations.
So yes, that would work in the sense that the consumer can build some extra software to tease out the user intent and matches to an annotation. Yes, the one difficulty with this is that we then can't cryptographically protect the changes of the tag. With Notary v1, you can have a latest tag that always points to the latest value, and if you update the tag, it's cryptographically protected that the user will really get the updated version. If we put the information about the version inside the annotation, we can end up with 3 images named version 1.0, and it's not obvious which one is correct, and we won't be able to use the extra cryptography to help us in that case. But it would be sufficient to allay my concerns, I guess.
So I'm reluctant, I'll say this, then we can decide whether it's relevant to this time or not. I think annotations there's a set of annotations that absolutely should be signed that are part of the manifest. What the annotations represent, whether it almost sounds like we might be saying an annotation represents a tag and name as well. But the other thing was, I think we want to be able to have a set of annotations or some kind of metadata that can be associated with an artifact that actually doesn't change the signature, because at some point, if I have a copy of the MySQL, I want to associate some, and I'll use the word metadata here, with it, that I want to flow with it, but it doesn't change the signature, just additional information. It might say that, hey, I've agreed that this MySQL version is good for my environment. But when anything downstream of my flow sees it, it should still see, oh, that's still the MySQL signature. That's good. So I think annotations should be signed. I wonder what do we do about some other elements that we want to be able to associate with an artifact that shouldn't change the signature. And if this is too much of a tangent, then maybe we should just back off, because I think we were really at the question of how do we have names? So I think what I was kind of teasing it in there is, in addition to, where was this listing here? Glossary of terms, name, signature, sorry, key, signature, artifact, key store is also a manifest is a way that is the thing that gets signed. Oh, I see somebody did elaborate on that list.
Yeah, as we're talking, I'm writing down words that I think we should describe or define. And this is all really good stuff.
Yeah, describe, define, and articulate what we think the association is between them.
Yes.
Kind of like how we think of manifests and layers and,
so a glossary of terms as well as the relationship of one term to another.
Yeah. Vincent, you got squishy eyes over there. What you thinking?
I don't know. I'm still listening and taking it all in. I feel like some of that we were even saying the same thing. We're getting to a good 14-minute list, but nothing. I'm just processing and listening to somebody's floppy dogs.
Look,
are we going to wind up with a mascot?
I think so. I think it takes many types of cooks to make a good spec, and a dog as well. I think that's just...
So, Omar, you were originally going to take on the glossier terms.
Yes.
Do you feel? I know you were saying you also were really busy. Do you
that
feel like you have some bandwidth coming
this
up?
week? There is bandwidth for that, so I'll throw that into the. At least I'll start that, and I'll send that out.
Yeah, just do a PR on the specs. What do you call it? The requirements repo, and just put it as a separate branch. So what I'm trying to figure out is how to separate these things. So we'll have a separate branch maybe for that one, and we can do a PR and iterate the conversations. And until they start pointing at each other, they're fairly easy to review independently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do we think we've covered a bit, because I interrupted Sam. He was transitioning to another topic because I wanted to drill into the local signing conversation and the 4 or 6 element names that we just described. Do we want to pause on that and let Omar write up something, and we can review that and see how that frames our thoughts, and maybe give Sam a chance to go on to the second thing that he was about to elaborate on?
Almost. Can I just say one other thing? It was just when you were talking about signed and unsigned annotations. It just occurred to me that actually what happens really is you get an image from a vendor, and they have the vendor signature that you can verify, and that would have vendor annotations, and then there may be another set of annotations that somebody says, some process has gone through that verifies that it's suitable for use in production, and you add some local annotations to it, and you want to sign those as well, maybe on top of, without invalidating the vendor annotations. I'm not sure that would necessarily be possible in the technology that we described, where because the manifest would change at that point.
I see. Because annotations are tied to a specific manifest. You're right. I was going to say it's just code. Anything's possible. But, when we define boundaries of what we're willing to muck with, probably not. I do struggle a little bit on the annotation ones, because there's another piece of registries we discussed around a common metadata API that we could all consume because we've all created our own. And then there's the software bill of materials discussions, which is supposed to account for many of these things as well. So if you see in some of the notes into in the comments, I've tried to refer to some of those things, and I'm trying to put things, all right, that belongs in that spec, or I think that belongs in that, because I'm trying to find a narrow path that we can write down. Justin and I were just talking this morning around how we need to get a little bit more organized with the SBOM team, and have a better understanding of the scope of what they're trying to approach, and figure out, do we believe we can bet on their success, so we could defer some stuff to them, and we could also discuss what do we think is a top priority that we get in the initial thing. So those are, things that happen along the way.
On the topic of annotations, I would really prefer not to have signed, unsigned annotations inside the manifest.
So you would, sorry, Merrick, you would or would not?
Would not. It just gets the verification messy. It introduces extra parsers into the verification code. It makes it difficult to extend it to non-image artifacts. We are definitely going to have completely unsigned annotations. Well, every kind of metadata the registry has as an extra feature is in some sense an annotation, but I don't think we want to specifically design for that, especially because having every unsigned annotation in there is a UI trap. Some user is going to trust the value.
So if I say that back out loud, so what you're saying is we should scope this as annotations on a manifest, because we are talking about aligning the OCI manifest work with Notary v2, is any annotation in it that gets signed is signed. There is no concept of signed and unsigned annotations. There might be some metadata thing that's I hate the word sidecar, but in this case it might be appropriate. Basically, the things that come with that are signed, and that's it. If you want to add new annotations to a manifest, you need a new manifest, and that's a new signature. And we should look for other means to store additional data that would travel through the life cycle of an existing artifact.
Oh, I'm saying that we should sign the manifest as a block without inspecting it, but there was a third part to it. We probably are going to end up with manifests with annotations inside signatures, either as explicit annotations or just as an extensibility mechanism for the signature format as itself anyway. So I think it's reasonable to work with that concept to an extent. Completely unsigned annotations are just out of our scope, but
yeah, I'm agreed with you.
Put in a place for somebody to add a signed claim inside the signature they are creating. It should be cheap enough. It's just a data structure.
Okay.
So I think it might help if we start to take some of the at the meeting that we had in Seattle, John Johnson and Vincent were working on a straw man proposal of what the structure of this could look like. It might make sense to start bringing that into the repository that we've set up, to start to talk about different options and what that would mean for what part of the data is signed, how that is supposed to work with manifests and manifest lists, those kinds of things. So I can start taking a look at that if no one else wants to.
That'd be great.
That's a good idea, Sam, because then at least we're looking at something, right? And then we can.
Yeah, we'll have something a little bit more concrete to talk about.
Yeah. No, please go for it.
So, Sam, you were trying to transition to a second topic when we got into this one. Was there something else? What was the other one?
I wasn't really trying to transition into it. It was more just pointing out that it was a separate topic. You were bringing up both naming and key distribution at the same time.
Ah.
And we should talk about key distribution, but I don't know if it's not really the same thing as naming. That was really the only point that I was trying to make.
Agreed. And that was part of what we're going to try to capture as the definitions of terms of what these things are, how they relate to each other. Because there's definitely an intermixture, but there's a separation as well. Okay. trying to think what was the other meaty thing we were discussing in the PR that we wanted to talk about in person. Let me just pull it up here. Do you remember, Sam, offhand?
Which other meaty topic we were talking about?
Yeah, there's just the PR has gotten a number of things in there. I've been trying to resolve the ones I think were resolved and leave the ones that are open, but what's happening is the open ones are pivoting in a path that it's hard to keep up with. I think one of them was, let's see, the fact that something is signed and you update a tag is, basically I do an OSR framework patch to FX10. The idea is that should be a valid scenario, but if somebody else signs that and just names it arbitrarily FX10, how do we resolve that? There was a question that you were starting to tease in around policy, which I was trying to avoid specific policies, but trying to make sure we can enable policies. I've also struggled a little bit on how much do I reference Kubernetes when it doesn't actually support exactly what we're trying to do yet, versus a Contoso kind of name or Wabbit networks or whatever it is I was trying to use as generic names. So how do we want to, I guess the question would be, how do we want to just refer to some of these things that we want to enable a policy with an end-to-end set of products without naming a particular product unless we're actually going to build that capability?
Are you talking about how do we name things in the specification and in our discussion, or is this a question about the actual feature of the signing?
So in the requirements or scenarios, what I'm trying to do is reference a scenario that enables a certain capability. To really enable the capability end-to-end assumes a host, a thing that's going to run these artifacts, whether it be Helm, Singularity, or containers, can integrate with that. So for instance, there's a bunch of these that says, hey, I've signed this artifact, I've pushed it to a registry, and now in my rollout, I've told this thing, Kubernetes, to run this image with this Helm chart. The assumption is that Kubernetes accepts the request. It then goes and pulls it. It has been configured that says, here's the signatures that I support. And and if it's not signed with one of those signatures, then it rejects it. That experience doesn't exist. So it's kind of hard to refer to Kubernetes as doing something that doesn't currently do. So either we do that with the implication that we are going to do that with Kubernetes, and we just accept it, and maybe even we start working on it, or we refer to some other project that's also concrete, or do we refer to it as just, we make up some name for an orchestrator and talk about it in abstract?
So speaking as someone who's completely biased about supporting other orchestrators than Kubernetes, I would want us to talk about it in terms of capabilities an orchestrator can do, or capabilities that a kind of software can do.
Fair. Okay.
If that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Your reference is even more classic. Because that's exactly what we want. We definitely want to enable uniqueness and value. So there's no question about that. So it sounds like you're implying that we just come up with some, Wascally Wabbit orchestrator kind of thing. And obviously it's something that's not a particular project, but it establishes a pattern that individual projects can go off and do, because we've made sure that Notary v2 supports this capability. And if the secret project over at AKS and the one at Google or whatever goes off and does these capabilities later on, it's not a surprise because we've made sure we've enabled these core capabilities, kind of the way we're seeing Containerd, enable certain scenarios that we're all working to implement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know that we need to pick a name. We could just say an orchestrator.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we are discussing signing, maybe software that does the signing and verification, maybe a shared way to express configuration for that software. And at the end, there's the software that gets an artifact, gets a signature, and says yes or no, and maybe some metadata. Actual orchestrators are strongly out of scope, I think.
Okay, so I'm just making a note here. The spec should refer to orchestrators generically. Period. Okay.
Going back to the specific question that you, if we can, if no one else objects, going back to the specific question that you brought up about your scenarios and you were saying that I had asked you a question about FX 1.0 and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
The point that I was trying to make there was a question about which piece of software or which thing is doing verification. Because the only way that if it's a client that's doing verification, the only way the client knows that it used to be signed and now it's not signed is if the client had seen the image previously and seen that it was signed in the past.
Yeah, which is a scenario, and I have to figure out how to articulate that better. I was struggling on trying to figure out which piece of the stack would refer to it and be vague in some places and concrete in others, and I think the thing just kind of fell apart as I tried to be too abstract. Okay.
This is not true. In principle, the client can be preceded with a trust configuration.
I'm sorry, Merrick, can you say it again?
The client can be pre-configured with some trust configuration. It does not have to be trust.
Right. That would be another way, is if the client had previously received a list of like things that it would expect signatures on, or similarly, if it pre-received a list of keys that it trusts versus things that it doesn't trust, then it's able to do validation. But my point was the scenario in the pull request didn't really say either of those things. It just said that the client should be able to validate that something was previously signed and is now not signed. I was trying to drive a little bit more clarity there.
Yeah. Okay.
But you're totally right, Merrick.
All right, I'll give that another spin. So we're at 5 minutes to. Just a quick. So thank you. This was great. Really, not only just to have the conversation, but the group of people from the various perspectives. It really helps round us out here. It's unfortunate that Justin isn't here, but we'll at least have the video that he can reference, and I'm sure we'll all be talking to him in various forms. I'll work to make sure that I get an agenda out the Thursday or Friday before if people would like, and I will send an email out reminding people. So if they want an agenda out, if one agenda topics, please get it in before the weekend before, and we'll start there, and obviously on the various other housekeeping pieces. That's about what I have, and I am going to make time this week to work on incorporating all the feedback. What my proposal, which I put in here at one point because there was a great conversation around the base artifact, the base layers, and how do we refer to signatures in those, is I love that scenario. It is a little bit more complex. I'm sure we'll have more discussions on it. So I was going to propose, for instance, let's get a court, because right now, basically the entire Notary V2 stuff is basically empty. So I would like to get something minimalistic in there that we do agree on, and then we can add. So I was going to use, for instance, the base layer thing as being something we can, after we can get a core set of scenarios in, that we can add that one as another PR on top of it as an approach.
That sounds.
All right. With that, I'll let people get ready for their next part of their day, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.